Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs.
Welcome everyone to our podcast. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher. Who we do welcome today is Diane Snowball. Welcome back, Di.
Hi, Phil. Nice to be back.
Yeah, and we've been on a few of our podcasts, but today we've got a really important subject, the importance of high-frequency words. We'll come to that in a minute, but what have you been up to lately?
Oh, well, a lot of gardening, actually.
Yeah.
We've got a very large garden and there's a lot to do, and we're not getting enough rain. Lots of weeds, of course, but lots to plant. I enjoy it a lot. It gives me a chance to get out there and some fresh air and exercise.
Yeah.
But I've also been doing a lot of reading. You know, that's always great to do, reading professionally and reading for relaxation. Yep. Again, I don't think there's enough time to do it all. So
no, there's so many.
Life's busy.
And there's so many books to read, aren't there? How will we ever get through them all?
Yep.
And
just
also
reading the news, filtering it out, etc. Yeah.
And you're out of lockdown now, so you're out and about a bit more.
Oh yes, certainly. Glad to be out of lockdown. I hope it stays that way. But it's interesting. You have time to do other things. You appreciate your friends because you don't get to see enough of them, etc.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to keep up to date with, even just reading sensibly about things like that. So it's a busy time.
Now, Di, I was just going to ask you, because some of our listeners may not know that you are the founder of a big change that happened in New York in education. Can you tell us a bit about that, how it started?
Oh, sure. Well, back in 92, I received a fax in those days, no internet, inviting me to go to work with the writing project at Columbia University in New York. And I thought, what an interesting thing to do. So my husband Greg and I decided that we could change our life that much and go for a while and, to work somewhere new, try ideas out in new places. I'd been there before, speaking at international conferences and working with principals in New York even. That was why I think then things followed on from that. But I hadn't been there very long when a superintendent asked would I start working with all of the schools in his district, because there were at that time 32 districts in New York. And
was that
so
in Manhattan, was it? Or?
No, all over the 5 boroughs of New York.
Yep.
Yes,
yep.
Manhattan being one of them. Part of one of them. So this particular district ranged from down the southern part of Manhattan in Chinatown right up the east side to around almost up into Harlem, but also including some very well-to-do areas in New York City. So I said yes, as long as I could work with the principals as well as teachers. And that's very important that principals get involved, as you know, in any professional learning that's going on. And I was put in the most struggling schools, and results improved so quickly within a year that the superintendent wanted me to bring more Australians over to be able to work in more schools because there were over 40 schools in that district. And that's the start of it gradually developing. So by the time we finished over there, we'd had over, at one time, about 350 consultants, mostly from Australia and a few from New Zealand, a few Americans, and we were working in literacy and maths. We had a huge impact because we worked in about 1,000 of the schools in New York City alone, as well as other parts of America, but that was a big part of the work. And we really did make a difference. And I'll tell you what I realised made the biggest difference. Teachers used to say to me, after being in their classroom for a very short time, because that was our work, to work in classrooms with teachers, get to know them and their kids, and do a lot of demonstration and help them to make changes. But they said, how do you know our children so well after such a short time, even half an hour? And I said, well, that's how I was trained as a teacher, that the most important thing was to observe what your children are doing and to learn from that what they're really good at, what they mostly need help with, and to then plan. And so I couldn't understand how they could have a program that they would use to work with every child and just do the same things with everybody every day. And it made a huge difference to them to think that way. And all of us who were working there, and you and Sharon were two of them, you know that's what we had to help them to do the most, to not use programs, but to get to know about their children, to become knowledgeable themselves about literacy or numeracy, so that they didn't need to rely on someone else who didn't even know their children writing programs for them. And of course, once you start teaching that way, you don't ever change. It's the best kind of professional learning to do with people, because you don't go back from it. You know how important it is to know your students rather than to just go clutching for programs, and to continue your professional learning so that you're making wise judgments about what you do. And it's very difficult then, I know, when the state might be demanding something that you know is not the best for the children in your class, and you've got to go along with it. That causes a dilemma. But you still, no matter what you're being told to do, you're still doing the best you can under whatever circumstances, because you're observing your children and learning from them about what you need to do. So I know that even 20, 30 years later, the teachers we worked with would still be working that way. So it's not just, this is the latest gimmick or fad or in thing or part of the reading wars or whatever stuff. It's really the most important, learning about your children. And it makes you know that there are some things you don't know how to find out about because you don't know enough yourself. And I think that's what causes teachers to do good professional learning too, because they've got a real purpose for it. In order to teach better, they need to know more about how do children learn to read, how do they learn to write, to spell, and what are all of the parts of that, not just one small part of it. But, if a child's having trouble with something, well, what is it that they're having trouble with in reading? There's no just blanket answer for it all. You all need to do more of this or that. It depends on what the child needs because of what they're good at and what they need help with. So, you do a much broader professional learning, and you're keen to do it because it's making your teaching better.
And the only resource we probably need are beautiful children's books.
Definitely.
Paper and pencils, really.
Yeah, it's exactly true. A good range of children's books. And of course, they didn't have that because they had one reading program, and all of the money went into a program and not money left to buy books for their classrooms. So even just having the principal understand why it was more important to spend money on good children's books, fiction and non-fiction, and a whole range, poetry and plays, every kind of reading and writing that can happen because of that. And having that so accessible in your classroom, borrowing from the school library for sure, but, thinking wisely about how to spend your money. And the last thing, because tonight we're going to talk about one aspect of spelling, learning high frequency words, you definitely do not need any program for that. The kids only need to have been reading books where they're seeing the words, and then to pencil and paper or pen and paper to be writing so that they have a chance to practice what they're learning. And for the teacher, again, to be able to see what do they know. And if they already know how to spell some words, don't waste time teaching those. Go on to something else they need help with. Yep, it is basically what you need, Phil.
At some stage, did the City of New York decide to buy books for every classroom in the city? Was that what happened, or?
Well, no, the principals would be able to spend the money on whatever they wanted to in New York City, at least. Right. Other parts of the country, they would just be supplied by the state. The principal didn't have any choice. No. But there they were certainly able to, the principal could decide what they wanted to spend their money on.
And you guided them into buying classroom libraries for every
classroom,
for
sure.
In a lot of schools in New York?
In all of the primary schools, I don't think there would be hardly a school that we didn't work in. So we made a huge difference right across. I mean, New York City became one of the most successful cities in the whole of the state, and all of the US, because of the good professional learning they were doing and what children had to read, especially across a system. You can find pockets of good schools everywhere, but systemically, that was a phenomenal thing to do.
Yeah, it's
changing their curriculum so that to really understand what reading is and what writing is, and then to go about how to put in place, even knowing how to work with groups rather than a whole class all the time. You know.
Yeah.
So knowing how to choose children to be in groups, not fixed groups. And, so all those sorts of things came into it, of course. But I think because it was happening systemically, every school being involved makes a big difference to how change can happen.
Yes, and it must have been very wise leadership at the top, I think.
Well, yes, there was. It's interesting. As an Australian leading Aussie, Australian United States Services in Education, every time there was a change at the top, the first thing they would do would be invite me in to talk to them about literacy learning. In particular, they wanted to know more about numeracy after we'd been there for a while. You've had such success, can you do it with numeracy too? But they did want to know right at the top, what should we be doing? Help us learn as well. And that is so important in any educational system, so that, the Chancellor, the person in charge of education, everybody right at the top wanting to know a lot more about what they should be doing.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So then you came back to Australia and you started a whole lot change in Melbourne. Yeah,
I did. We were there for 16 years in New York, but when I came home, I was shocked because when I left Victoria, every classroom in primary schools had a classroom library, I'm sure. I don't remember it ever being any other way anyway. And I wanted to know where the books had gone. So I offered to give my services voluntary to the large Western metropolitan region of Melbourne, and I think that was about 180 primary and secondary schools, and to work with the regional director and also to work with the people who are top in the central part of the education department as well, to talk about, again, how if kids didn't read, how are they going to be successful at reading? I mean, it's as fundamental as that, isn't it? If they didn't write, how could they become better at writing?
Yep.
Why would there be a purpose to learn about spelling? And if they didn't read really rich stuff, how was any of their reading or writing going to improve? And it needed to be in classrooms as well as the school library. So we really started from basics again. Once children are reading, then as a teacher, you have a chance to listen to them read and find out what they can do and what they need help with. And again, if that makes you think, well, golly, I don't know enough about it, I better go and learn some more, that's good, because you have a purpose for being a better teacher as well. And so it goes on from there. And that was the work we did. So many of the consultants who'd been working in New York had come back, and there were a huge number of us working right across Western Metropolitan region with primary and secondary schools. Again, all of the principals learning, as well as APs and literacy leaders in their schools, very systemic learning across all of them. So they became the most improved region of all of Australia.
Good heavens.
In their literacy work. So it's possible to do without programs and just getting people to understand a lot about what they should be doing. We didn't have wars that the press keeps talking about these days. It's so unhelpful. We just learned a lot about what were the best kinds of things to do, and not just one thing, not just focus on one thing's going to be the be-all and end-all to solve everything.
Yep. It's the rich curriculum that we use, the fullness of the Australian curriculum. So that's incredible.
Luckily in Victoria, there's a very good literacy toolkit as a guideline for teachers to look at. And I think the sad thing is there's definitely not enough opportunities for professional learning, especially systemically. And I say thank goodness for what you and Sharon are doing, frankly, these days, because it's a really good place to go to learn good stuff.
Oh, thank you, Di.
And no, good on you for doing it. I know what you're doing in your personal life to keep doing it is tremendous. So, and it is such a need. Good professional learning.
And that's where the money should go, really, not into all these published things that we...
You want teachers to make good decisions about each student and, not just to go on willy-nilly because someone tells you this is a program you should have. And look, I'm sure that, if you're not allowed to do anything else, you can make use of programs that you have to use, as long as you really know enough about literacy learning to know what you're doing, what to choose, what to do more of, which children to do more of with, all of those really very important professional decisions.
Yeah, and I guess one of the big changes was in New York and in Melbourne was just really having the kids having purposeful writing and reading to do. Really, that was a big thing, wasn't it?
For sure. Yeah. So, the more things become a formula, I think the worse they are. And I think we always have to stand back and say, what do writers do? Let's help our children become writers. And, what do people who are effective readers do? Let's make sure we've got all of those conditions in place, the range of literature. And a teacher conferring with children to know what they can do and what they need help with. That's such an important basic process. Until you do that, you don't even know which groups you might need to form or what sort of material you need to buy, what is required in your classroom. If you don't find that out, then you haven't done step number one.
Yeah. Anyway, should we go on to the importance of high-frequency words as our topic today?
For sure. And look, everything we've said so far fits into what we need to think about, first of all, with this topic. I mean, the only reason you need to learn the words that we read and write most often is because we read and write.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then there is no purpose for learning those high frequency words.
Yeah.
So it sort of undermines, again, our thinking about how are we going to go about doing that successfully, because it needs to have a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to understand how does the learning happen the best way. And, again, don't need a program.
Yep.
You don't even actually need to start off by knowing what the high frequency words are, because your children will soon tell you. And if they can't, it's because you haven't been doing enough shared reading with them where they can see, all eyes on the one enlarged text, they can see the words, hear you say them, and they're reading them with you. And so they start to recognise from the very start of school, if they don't already know this beforehand, what are the words that keep cropping up all the time that they're reading. And I find that with a foundation or first year at school kids, if I've been doing that for the first few weeks of school, and of course they've got access to books themselves, and I'll say, what have you noticed are the words that all writers seem to use a lot? And they will start to tell you, and the, I, was, when, they'll tell you what they are. And the ones that come up in everything they read. And then as they're writing, because we want to encourage them to write even before they know how to spell, they'll be noticing that they're using those words too, and they want to know how to spell them because they're writing. But there's one other key part of that in terms of spelling. If no one's reading your writing, then you might as well spell words any way you like. So if they're swapping their writing with each other, then they realise that if I don't spell it the same as other people do, they won't know what it is I'm writing.
Yep.
So it's a very authentic reason to learn to spell. And if they're words that we use more often than others, then there's a good reason to learn those as quickly as we possibly can. So by the end of the second year at school, by the end of grade 1, we would hope kids can recognise as a reader and write as a writer those most often used words. So there's some people will say 100, there's about 120.
Right.
There are 50 that are used more than anything else. But if we're noticing what they are, the kids are, and they help you develop the list, then there's your list.
Right.
And you know why you and the children are spending time on learning them. Not just how to spell, but how to recognise as a reader too. And of course, as a reader, they're sort of the words that hang everything else together. So they're important to help meaning and to help you to read fluently because they're there so often.
Yep.
So, there's a lot of emphasis on children learning, sound symbol relationships, for example, but that doesn't work for most of the high frequency words. Only 19 of the most frequent 120 words could you just sound out.
Right.
And so it's not actually regular to be able to only use sound symbol relationships to work out what the words will be. Was, for example, a very common word. And how were you going to, if you listen to the sounds in that word, z, what will you write? And a 5-year-old will probably write W-O-Z because they're the sounds they hear. Now, if I see a child doing that, I think, wow, isn't that fantastic? I know they're really good at listening for the sounds in the words they want to write, and then they're trying to write a way to as a symbol for those sounds. And that's a fantastic thing to recognise about what a child is doing in their writing, isn't it? What a positive thing to do. Before that, they might write WZ because hearing those vowels in the middle of words, they're not as concrete as the consonants at the beginning and the end. And so you need to recognise that's really fabulous. They're hearing the beginning and ending sounds if they just wrote WZ. You recognise it as a positive rather than, isn't that terrible, that child doesn't know how to spell that word. You're looking for what they can do. So they are important because they're used so often. And so we need to figure out what's the best way to deal with them.
Yeah, if you have those under your belt, so to speak, you helps you with your reading and your writing, and
Yep.
Yep.
And it helps you with about 50% of all of the words that you read and write. So that's a pretty good start, isn't it? It's
Yep.
certainly going to help you to work out what other words are. And, there's two ways about that too. I'm sorry, I just can't believe that no one thinks you don't have to work out what a sentence is about to help you read it. You could say all of the words, perhaps if they were all phonetic words, but you may not know what they mean. So I hope we never lose the sense of meaning being important in whatever we're reading and writing. But, if I know a high frequency word that might be in that sentence and it will help me to work out what other words in that sentence might be, then that's really important too. So they don't just stand alone, they'll help with others. And then there's a second aspect of that. If I know how to spell a word like and I actually got an email from a teacher yesterday, a grade 1 teacher, who told me that a boy asked her how to spell grand, and she said, well, you know how to spell and, so that will help you with grand. And he went away so excited because he realised he could work that out for himself.
Yep.
And of those high frequency words, there are many that you can do that with. And especially if you don't just think of words with the same spelling pattern like the and grand, but also if I know and, then that would help me with stand, and that would help me with understand and standing and stands and, all of those words that, grandstand, so that you can keep building on what you know to help you with other words. And the more that we help kids to think that way as a reader and writer, the better off they're going to be. So, they become very important, if you like, base words to branch out from as well. And we don't want to just leave it as knowing those words. They're important for more than just knowing them alone. But notice they are necessarily going to be words that you know because you can just sound them out. But, what will you do with a word like said? Will you write it S-E-D? Or will you also need to look at the word and notice that it's got an A-I in the middle and not an E? So I want the children to not just develop listening for sounds, but also looking at what words look like. So, it's not enough to just do one thing. We've got to teach our kids lots of strategies for reading and spelling.
Yeah, the more strategies we have, we are more we're stronger, aren't we?
That definitely. And then there's going to be more than that. There's going to be, why is TWL spelt the way it is? And it's because it's related in meaning to words like twin, twice, 20, and so forth, so that the children are actually hearing that there's a T and a W at the beginning and looking at the word two, TWO, as in two people, they can see those two letters at the beginning, even though, it doesn't sound like that. It sounds just like it would be spelt T-O and T-double-O, and of course it can be, can't it?
Yep.
And so we also need to think about the meaning, and that's an important thing about those words. They're homophones. They all sound the same, but they're spelt differently. So we want to also discuss, what about the usage of those words, the meaning of them, and how will we find that out? Because if we just tell the kids, they don't really understand it. But if I say, let's explore and see what authors do, when do they use each of those words? And we find sentences with each of those words. And we can notice that when it's TO, it's this group, and when it's TOO, it's this group, and TWO, it's always just to do with two things, hold up two fingers. So if we know that, then let's figure out the other two. and then we will know how to use those words. But again, let the kids figure it out and tell you in their own words how they will know how to use each of those words. They might have memory aids. Again, they might have understandings that will help them to do it. And I learnt that from a child in grade 2 many years ago who said, you have to be able to get it. And I thought, yeah, that's it. You've got to get it. It's not just someone telling you, but you have to understand it. So it's get it. How could we get it? Well, let's explore it and really have them figure it out. So they say, oh, I've got it. The light bulb goes on.
So it's having lots of meaning, children looking for patterns together. All these things are really helpful, aren't they?
They are. There are explorations that the kids, this same teacher sent me this email yesterday. And she said the kids are so excited when they do explorations to find this out for themselves. And they say, oh, I found another one, and here's another situation, and what about this one, and building lists that they are discovering for themselves. And of course, you're the knowledgeable teacher who knows we need to deal with high-frequency words. We need to think about many ways to learn them. How can I keep the kids thinking? How can I make sure they've got an authentic purpose for learning them because they're reading and writing? So if the teacher isn't leading that learning, it's not necessarily going to happen with each child. But I want to tell you that kids can also discover things without you bringing it up with them. I'm working with a boy in grade 3, 4. So he's in the grade 3 level. And I noticed that when he wrote words like bogged, he would write B-O-G-G-E-D. He's interested in tractors, and that's why the word bogged came up. And I asked him, how did he know for that to be a double G? And he said, well, I've noticed when I'm reading, that sometimes that, a word like bog, that I'll double that letter, the G in this case, before I add another ending to it. And so he's just intuitively noticed this, and he's starting to apply it to words he wants to write for himself. And that's the sort of guideline that we want to give the kids as a whole to work that way. But isn't it wonderful that if we let them learn and discover, they will even come up with those strategies themselves. Now, he may not be able to explain why at this stage, and so we can lead that discovery further and help him to find out what are all the sorts of things you need to do to base words before you add suffixes, and even the language I'm using when we do that. And we allow that exploration to go on for a long enough time so that the kids get it and can explain it in their own words. So that might be part of what we're doing with high frequency words as well. It doesn't just stop with, and it certainly doesn't even start with, simply some rote learning of a word and a test on Friday. And then they don't remember it and don't use it in their own writing afterwards because of what we've done. And you see that what we've done has usually been up to 20 words, children being told to go home and learn in 1 week, but with no information about how to learn them and no information for the parents about how to learn them. So it's not actually teaching, but it's saying you go off and figure out some way to do this all by yourself. And with too many words, it's very, very frustrating for some children and parents. I've always had parents tell me that. It's very frustrating for them and the kids. And somehow or another, they've just flogged themselves to death with their kids during the week, trying to, remember these words for some test on Friday. Whew, terrible, isn't it, in comparison with what could be done.
Yeah, when you're not using it in real reading and writing.
No, and you're not given a range of strategies for thinking about each of the words. So, in fact, I realised that so many parents were being called on to do this that I should write a booklet for parents about how to help their children learn high-frequency words. And then I realised that not all teachers know how to do that either. So I should do a parent's version and a teacher's version. And I know you have that now as one of your resources.
Yep.
But, it is detailed, giving information for each of those words, not just presuming you're going to do the same thing to learn all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And, watching what kids do, I realised that I've no right to even think that they're necessarily all going to be, that some of them that I think are simple to learn are not necessarily simple. So that if I watch children trying to think about the word went, and I think, well, I can hear each of the sounds in that word. So if I'm hearing word, and the children will easily work out how to spell that. And then I look at what they do as writers, and they don't put the N in, a lot of them.
Mm.
And I have to think, why, as a teacher? And I realise when I say the word went, that the N, when I'm saying it, is just a nasal sound that isn't really very easy to hear or
Right.
know is in that word. So many of them will write W-E-T as a way to spell went, because that's what they can hear most of all. So I don't presume anything anymore about any of the words. I watch and learn as a teacher about what they might need help with. So when I write about how to learn words like went and want, and I think they're two that are good to learn together because of that N being the problem in both of them. And so I want them to look at those words and notice every letter in it, as well as hear the sounds in the word. And those two things together will help them. Because especially for want, the O sound is an A. So I don't want them to just listen for sounds. I want them to also look at a word and notice what's interesting or different or surprising about it, because that will also help them to remember how to spell a word.
So a couple of things, Di. While you're doing all this with the children, you're also watching out for what you're going to do in your next mini lesson, and you're also seeing what children are going to share during a sharing session, because that's important too, isn't it?
It is, definitely. And, that sharing session, there's a number of things that I think of with that. For example, if I have the class together do some what I could call interactive writing, where I'm calling on the kids to have a go at some of the words, then they're sharing their ideas with the other children about how they might attempt a word. And so they might, I might call on a child to write a word like want, and they might write W-O-N-T, and they can talk about why they spelt the word that way. And then we can look at the word and think about what it looks like and what surprises them, and the whole class can be involved in that discussion and the sharing of information about it. And we're all learning together that there's more than one thing to take into account when you're thinking about how to read or write a word. But the other sharing that I want the kids to do is when they find something out, to share it with the other kids. Or if they're having trouble learning a word and always remembering how to write it or how to read it, I want them to come out and share that that's a word they're having problems with, and can the other children give them any ideas about how to learn that word.
Right.
So it's one of the really good discussions you can have at perhaps the end of a writing session.
Yep.
Or a reading session, when kids can talk about some problems they're having, and can the others share ideas about how to solve it. So all of that, hearing what kids are doing and asking for help with, is really good information for us as teachers, as you say, to help plan perhaps the next things that we're going to do.
Yeah.
And just, in a reading conference or a writing conference, to find that out and to think, or even to walk around a classroom and to write down the words that the children are misspelling, and to notice then which are the common ones they're misspelling, and to say, well, if they're a number of kids are misspelling those words, they would be really good words for us all to learn, because they're writing them, but they're not sure how to spell them. But some kids know who could share ideas with them. So the whole thing works well together, and it makes sense. It's good teaching. It's sensible teaching. It's almost, some of it's teaching on the spot, but it's also helping you to plan what you need to do more of and what you need to do next. And, I have found during lockdown that a number of children in grade 1, and I've done a lot of working with kids individually just online during this time, and they were still writing like what I would have expected children at the beginning of writing to do, to write words like got, GT, and not realise that there was a vowel in the middle. Because no one was doing any of that onset rhyme work with them, so that in the word got, ot is the rhyme, R-I-M-E, and G is the good sound at the beginning is the onset. So we need to do a lot more of that. And I would work more with that child on that. So if we know, and also if we know got, then how would we write hot, and how would we write what would be another word, bot, not that would be a word we use very often, lot.
Yes.
And that might lead me into a discussion about how a lot is not one word, because so many kids do that. And again, I know that because I've seen them write it that way. So, we would be helping kids by thinking that way. If I know this word, what other words would I know? Now, as a teacher, I know that there are 37 of those very dependable rhymes, R-I-M-E-S. So I want to actually make sure I plan for them to be learned in my foundation and grade 1 classroom, because when you don't, I see so many children not realising that there is a vowel in the middle of those words. And then they're not hearing that vowel, or they might write, they might write GET because it and sound the same or are articulated similarly in the mouth. You know what I mean? So I see that happening, and so I know what I can help them with. It's fascinating teaching when you work that way, isn't it?
Yes.
What you learn. And I'll tell you what else I've learned by doing that. I know that one of the ways that a child can actually get a word comes off their pen or pencil, it comes out of their mouth, is that look, say, spell, cover, write, check routine. So that if I wanted to learn what, we would look at it and notice. In fact, I think notice is better than look now. Notice that it's interesting because the sound in the middle of what is an A. Wow, that's the part I need to take notice of. That's the part I need to remember. I know the T at the end. I can hear the T sound on, and look, it's a T. That's not a problem to me. But the word sound at the beginning is WH. I need to notice that as well. Now, if I close my eyes, can I picture that word as a whole and think about what it looks like? Or what if I do that over and over and write it now from that picture in my head, W-H-A-T, W-H-A-T, then until I feel like that's automatic, and I could wake you up in the middle of the night and say, how do you spell what? And you'll know it. But do you know what I've noticed? That when I do this got, hot, lot, etc., that if there's a number of words with that pattern, it actually helps them remember the first word we started with. And I noticed that I was helping a child learn the word bark, because he was often writing about his dog, and therefore bark came up. And so because we went on to learn about lark and hark and mark and park, the more we wrote all of those other words, the more that helped him learn bark. So he didn't actually need to write bark through that look, say, cover, write, check process a lot of times. But if it was the type of word where we could write other words that were the same as it lots of times, and even go on to bark, barks, barking, barked, that all of that would help him remember how to spell bark. So I learned that last year and here I am, been teaching for 54 years. So we never stopped learning as a teacher either, that I didn't always need to do the look, say, covers, spell right check. It was also by letting them write a lot of other words that had the same spelling pattern, and then we could add suffixes to or prefixes to, and all of that together would help them to learn that word we started with. It makes life so much more interesting and better for the kids. They're not just learning one word, they're learning lots of words, but they're learning how words work, and that's so important.
Very powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So you're learning those high-frequency words in Foundation and Year 1, and then you're using onset and rhyme to as a real support structure there for you to learn many more words.
That's right, because there are a number of those high-frequency words that I can choose to do that with.
Yep.
But if they're not there in the high-frequency words, I would know that was an additional part of my work to deal with all of those rhymes, RIMES.
Yep.
So high-frequency isn't the only thing I'm doing.
No.
And when I calculate, okay, let's say there were about 120 words that over the first couple of years at school I wanted the children to automatically recognise and write. And there's about 40 school weeks in a school year. So is that doable, that by the end of grade 1 they could easily learn those words? Yep. Mm-hmm. And that would only be a couple of words a week. So I don't need to deal with giving them 20 words to learn at one time, which is hard. But it also saves me other time to do other things, because we also want to learn, we're going to do other phonological awareness work, perhaps if the kids don't recognise rhyming, that's RHYMENG, or can segment a word or hear the number of parts in a word, or hear, that if it rhymes, it might be high, but HI, HIGH, what would be by would be BY, BUY, etc. So that I want them to realise that even with one sound, that it might be spelt different ways. Mm-hmm. So that's also important too, isn't it? Yep. So I'm not just isolating my work to learning the high-frequency words in the first couple of years of school. No. I mean, it starts from even knowing the names of the letters of the alphabet, because we have to have a label to talk about words. If you ask me, how do you spell high, I have to be able to say, what do you mean? Do you mean as in so far off the ground, understanding the meaning of that high rather than hello? And then I have to be able to say, well, it's HIGH. If I just said I, well, then you might write down just HI, because that's another possible way to write those sounds. And in fact, I've actually read where someone who's writing about this and someone who calls themselves a literacy expert say that when you're telling kids how to spell a word, you sound it out. Well, if you do, they won't know how to spell it. You have to be able to use letter names. Mm-hmm. And so the names of the letters, of those 26 letters, are very important for kids to learn at the outset.
Yep. It's your reference,
so,
reference
it's
point.
It's not just one thing. I have to think about what comes before that in order for that to work well. And what needs to go with it in order for it to work well.
Yeah. So a school would then, working this way, would have the foundation teachers and year 1 teachers all working on this together, ideally.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And thinking about where's the starting point and how will I know that? Because the first thing I'm going to do is meet with my children. I'm going to find out who does already recognise the names of the letters. Mm-hmm. Upper and lowercase. And I mean, I think all states have some sort of assessment to find that out. Yep. I know it certainly is in any of the states I've worked in. But I wouldn't wait until every child in the class knows every name of every letter of the alphabet before we're allowed to do anything else. But I certainly want to find out, is that something I need to be spending a lot of time on with the class or with individuals or a small group, because it's going to be an important thing for us all to be able to use, even when we're talking about how to spell words by naming the letters. So we're working together, but we're thinking about, first I need to get them writing and feel confident about I am a writer.
Yep.
So I would need to accept anything that they're saying, this is my writing, and it might be scribble.
Yep.
Because there are many stages kids will go through, depending on what opportunities they've had before school in many cases. So I need to let them write. I need to have discussions with them to find out what they know about words and letters and sentences and etc. And then we'll know where to start and how much to do. But I know that one of the first things we need to start doing, and how will I know when to start? When I see some kids, or most kids, are starting to use some actual words spelt conventionally in their writing, I know they're ready to learn words, so we can embark at that point on starting to learn high-frequency words.
That's a good indication, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, if nobody's doing that, then they're not noticing what words look like. So I'd be very wary about expecting too many children to actually learn very many words. If that's, it's sort of that crux point. What am I seeing them do? What I want to lead them to next? But perhaps it might be, what am I not doing enough of? Am I not doing enough of looking for those high frequency words in our shared reading and highlighting them so that the kids start to see what they look like? Then those who weren't noticing them that might start to use them in their writing. Because it fascinates me how all of a sudden some kids will just start writing the, T-H-E, right? And it's because they've seen it so often in what we're reading.
So that shared reading where all eyes are on the same text is such a critical part, isn't it?
It sure is.
That beginning,
it certainly is.
Yep.
And doing that shared writing together.
Yep.
And me modelling writing as well. I mean, how do they even know there are spaces between words if I don't talk about that when I'm modelling writing for those very beginning writers? And getting to learn that the first word in a sentence is going to start with a capital letter, that we talk about those things by modelling writing. And then by calling on them to come out, as I know from watching them write, who's ready now to come out and do part of that writing in our interactive writing, and where we can be doing things such as, sounding words so that they might listen for sounds. But if I want the children to be learning the names of the letters of the alphabet, if I was to write a sentence on the board, let's say my dog is barking, I would say, my, M-Y, leave a space, dog, D-O-G, because I want the children to learn the names of the letters of the alphabet. So every opportunity I've got, I need to be naming those letters.
Yep.
We don't just teach one letter at a time. We're teaching all of the letters all of the time.
Right.
And it's a very important thing to think about, because if I only said dog, g, but the kids don't yet know that letter is called D, and this letter is called O, and this letter is called G, I won't ever be able to discuss with them the letters to use to spell the word. So it's a really, really important thinking process for teachers about when am I sounding, using the sound of a letter or groups of letters, and when am I naming the letter.
Yeah. So name, also alphabet books, are they useful?
Alphabet books galore.
Yep.
And not just one chart, because the one chart will have, perhaps for the letter A, it might have a picture of an apple. Well, an A isn't always A. So I also have to have another chart or an alphabet book that might have lots of things beginning with the letter A on a page, but it might be apple and apricot and what else could it be? The word after, of course, would be different again, but you were not likely to see that in an alphabet book. But it might be an alphabet book of animals, and the animal names will have, the letters pronounced differently and so forth. So it's multiple, so that they're not thinking an A is always an A. And I never say it. I would never say A says A, as though that's a fixed thing, that it always is. A can represent the A sound. In this word, A represents the A sound. In this word, A represents the A sound. In the word a dog, the A represents a sound. The best thinking as a teacher is always be truthful. Don't tell the kids something that's not true, because that will cause confusions.
Yep.
That makes sense?
It does.
It has to make sense to us all, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
And, thinking through those things carefully is also going to help you make wise decisions about what sort of resources you would spend your money on. If you're going to buy alphabet books, you need multiple. If you're going to have an alphabet chart, you can't just have one. If someone shows you a program that pretends that each letter of the alphabet only has one sound, you know that's not true. It couldn't be, because there's about 44 sounds or phonemes in the English language, even though we've only got 26 letters. So we need to make sure we're always doing things truthfully. Makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
So what else do we need to talk about with high frequency?
So we talked about now you've written those 2 resources which people will see in the show notes. So that's a good thing for them to go and download and use, because you go through every a lot of high frequency words and how you teach them. Yep.
The most common 120.
Yep.
And they're listed in the main in alphabetical order. There is no particular order, though, that they have to be learnt in. There are some people out there that think you've got to learn these 5 in a colour group, or these 10 and then these 10, and it's not true. If we were 2 different foundation teachers and my kids were learning and today and yours were learning that, it would not matter. What we're doing is making sure that by the end of the second year at school, they all know how to recognise and write all of them. And of course, I can't even say some are easier or harder than others. I've certainly learnt from children that what I've thought was easy isn't necessarily. I'm certainly aware of the ones that we need to talk about in different ways. And that's why for each word in these documents, which are called Helping Children Learn High Frequency Words, one's information for parents, one's information for teachers, for each word, then there's specific information about how to learn it. And when the kids know it, what other words they could then think about how to read and spell. And the only time that they're not just one word will be when there's a number of them are best taught together. For example, so, go, no, SOGONO, it makes sense to teach them together. It also makes sense to teach could, would, should together. It makes sense to teach play, played together, even though they're 2 high-frequency words. Why would you not teach them together? Because learning play will help you learn played. If we learn do, to, who, I would also think about into and doing. That's 5 high-frequency words that are worth thinking about together because of something that they have that's the same. And sometimes it's the sound, sometimes it's the spelling pattern, sometimes it's the rhyme, R-I-M-E, and sometimes it's just worth making a comparison, like of and off. It's good to learn them together because you can talk about the meaning of each of them. So that's the only time that I will group words together, and I'll explain why. So if you're a parent or a teacher and you don't know what would I do with this word, then the explanation is there. And if your kids can come up with other ideas about it that will help them to learn those words, that's great.
Yep. So this is not just a single answer for every word. It's
no.
These are your suggestions. Yeah,
that's right. Yep. And there's a general suggestion where you could use the look or notice, look, say, spelled out, cover it up, write it, and check each letter. That's a routine that is helpful for learning any word. And that reminds me that what I'm really doing with all of this work too, I'm teaching them how to learn words. So I'm teaching them a lot of strategies they could use for learning any word for the rest of their life.
Yep.
And that it might be to do with the meaning of the word, not just the sound or the spelling pattern or what you notice, but, it might be, for example, I'm working with some grade 6 kids in a science class, and we want to learn the word electrician. Then I want to go back to the base word electric, because that's what we did with played. We went back to the base word and thought, how do you spell play? Now, what am I adding to it for played? For electrician, the base word is electric. And I know how to spell it. It ends with IC. So if I'm working on the word electrician, I'm first of all going to write electric and then IAN. Otherwise, if I hear the electrician, I might think there's a sh sound near the end of that word. I'm going to write SH. So I want them to understand the meaning of the word, in that case, determines the spelling, not what they're hearing. And that's a very important part of learning English words. Their origins are from many other languages and many old languages. So we need to go back to that etymology. And as I say, even with the word to, T-W-O, why is it spelt that way? And the meaning determines it. And also, if you go back in an etymology dictionary, which you can get online, then you're going to find out, historically, perhaps words were even pronounced a different way in the past. Or, how they changed historically 500 years ago. And their spelling comes from that change. Okay, it's really interesting stuff. As a teacher, it's interesting as well as for the kids. But, so many words, English words, come from other languages. Even now, think about all the food words. Tortilla, the double L is the Y sound. Pizza, a double Z for the Z sound. Cappuccino, the ch is a double C. So all of these words are pronounced the way they are because they come from another language. But then you have to look at the spelling from that language, and that's what the spelling is going to be for us too. In fact, I got an invitation in the mail today to an etymology conference that's online next April, and they're just going to deal with food words about where they all come from. And, any of that just develops for kids a much better notion of where the English language comes from, rather than people saying, oh, it's a silly language, for every sound there's lots of different ways and blah, 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 and they make up poems about how silly the language is. But if you think of it from a meaning point of view, it's a very well-organised language.
It's a fascinating language, isn't it? It's
yeah. I know it doesn't make it easy for where English is a second language, and if your first language is phonetic and you're used to just for one sound, one symbol. But once you understand how to think about it, then it makes much more sense. I would sum it up by saying, just think of you and your class as all being learners, noticing and look, what does high frequency mean? It means used a lot, right? Used most often. It means that if we were studying snakes, during that study, where there are some words we're going to use a lot. Snake, venom, bite. If we're learning, or you're a boy who loves tractors, and girls can too, but if you're a kid who loves tractors and excavators, then you want to learn those words because they're high frequency for you. So I never refer to them as what some people will call sight words. I'm not sure what that really means, but I use the words that help the kids to understand high frequency, words we use a lot as readers and writers.
Yep.
And therefore, let's find out what they are and then think carefully about what will be the best way to learn each one of them. Can we group some? When we know one, what other words will we know? Always through life, when you learn a word, what other words will that help me to know how to read and write?
Yep.
And if you just keep thinking common sense about that and knowing the importance of shared reading and shared writing and the children's individual reading, again, if their reading is limited, their writing and therefore their spelling will be limited. It's why we cannot keep children to a very narrow diet of books for their reading. Their vocabulary will not be extended and they will not have seen words enough to be able to recall what they look like, which is what we do when we write a word a couple of ways and decide which way looks right. We have to have seen it somewhere before to be able to make that judgment. So just keep thinking about those common sense issues and it will allow you to look at whatever you're being told to do or resources or whatever, whether they make sense or not. Yes, you can go to lists that are published. I've even done one for you, haven't I, in the booklets I've written, but also go with what you're studying, what your children are interested in, and think of it as a whole learning process, that you're not learning a word only. You are also learning how to learn a word. Never just do it for spelling. If you learn the word for reading and for writing, then one will help the other. So, and again, I've seen some people just think about learning the words to recognise and don't think about the spelling. They go hand in hand.
Fantastic.
So it's good common sense.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dive, and thanks so much for all your wisdom today. And we look forward to having you on again at some stage.
Do you know what? The good thing about the webinars and your podcasts, Phil, is they're recorded.
Yep.
So that people can go to them at any time that they hear about them and they'll be able to get them from you. So that sometime in the future you might be listening to this podcast, just know that there's going to be a webinar on how to analyse children's writing to know how to help them in their spelling. So I can actually know a lot more about what to do by specifically working out what strategies is this child using to spell unknown words and what strategies is this child not using. And therefore I can work on that. And of course there are articles written and guidelines for help you to look at that.
The beauty of a webinar or a video is that you can actually show how it works.
Exactly, where we'll look at some samples of children's writing.
Yep.
And even look at your samples of your children's writing and figure out how to help particular children. And of course you'll find that there's groups of kids who are all doing the same sorts of things, so you don't actually have to teach everyone as an individual. And if I do work with my whole class, it's the whole class sharing and chatting about what we're all noticing or know already that we could share with others that becomes really valuable. So it's, I don't think any of us could teach a whole class individually. all of the time.
No,
And it doesn't make sense to me because there's no sharing of learning going on if we do that.
No.
So never feel guilty about doing good whole class work and about knowing how to choose a group of children who may need specific help, and then when that's dealt with, that group's over, disbanded.
Yes.
Whether we're talking about reading or spelling or some aspect of writing, just keep thinking about knowing your kids and knowing what they need, what they know. Okay.
And on
Phil.
that note, thank you so much, Di, for being with us today, and thank you everyone in the audience for listening. And see you next time. Bye for now.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.